Hey, Miguel and back here on the CRP, and I'm joined by Devin Miller for an episode of Outside the Cage. And, we're going to tackle the subject of immigration and the border crisis right now. I know it's a subject that, is big in the news all over the place, and Devin, sort of as a conservative, or at least one, he's painted as a conservative voice here on the CRP. Uh, Definitely has a couple of opinions that I think he wanted to get out there, and I'm here to maybe give a different perspective. I live in Central America, so a lot of the people that are heading up there are from my neck of the woods, sort of stuff. So, uh, maybe I've got a couple of different perspectives to share on there. Devin, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Miguel, and I do like that we're able to talk about these things, and it's going to be more of a dialogue. Maybe I really don't know the position that you're coming from on this. I try to see both sides. There's a lot of emotion that's wrapped up in this topic right now on the national scale. It was a hot button issue for the president back in 2016, and I think it's going to be just as hot of an issue going into this next election year. So, I think it's something that we definitely need to be discussing in a mature and rational way. And I see a lot of radicalization on both sides. So I hope that we can fairly represent this issue in a mature and logical manner.
You don't know me very well, do you? No, I'm just kidding. I agree with you. I think it's something that the problem with a lot of debates, whether whichever of the major debates that you choose, is that both sides think they're right. So there's no real room for change or people to adapt that much. So I don't necessarily think I'm right, but I do think I bring a little bit of a more of a global perspective to it than most Americans are going to maybe have access to, and if that's the case, then you can take the information and make an assessment for yourself. But so where are we? Are you guys building a wall? I actually got told today I was in a taxi heading to do some paperwork here in Costa Rica in San Jose, and the taxi driver said that he also was for the wall. And he understands. He thinks the wall's for the illegals, and that there's legal and stuff like that, and that they understood it. Now, but I'm in Costa Rica, and the difference here is that Costa Rica is really, in terms of immigration, is a destination country. They come here, and if they could stay here, and there's a system, and it's not perfect or anything like that, but some do stay here as opposed to going on to the United States and things like that. And we're one of the few countries in South America or in Central America with that problem. Honduras, Salvador, Nicaragua, people trying to leave those countries, and so we have a lot of the same issues here as you guys do. And some of them here will say, and by them I mean the Costa Rican folks will say, yeah, we need a wall too. The damn Nicaraguans are coming over here, and all they do is steal and rape, and the rhetoric's almost parallel to what you guys hear up there.
Yeah. Well, here recently, just in this past week, I believe that the Supreme Court did uphold that it is constitutional. They upheld the Trump administration's plan to, I believe, appropriate funds for the border wall on national security grounds out of the military budget. So I do believe that there is going to be sections of the border wall that are going to start being constructed. I deeply doubt even in Trump if Trump gets another term by the end of the 8 years, we're going to see a border wall spanning the entire length of the southern border with Mexico or anything, but I think that we'll get certain hot spots that I think that will get a barrier constructed around, which would help. The one thing, just to get this conversation kind of going on where I stand on it, that I feel like is just so misrepresented on the left in America right now, that they've done. Well, I think they've really failed with this narrative big time. I think the result of Trump becoming president shows this, and I still think they're failing on this narrative. But it's just something they won't back down from, and it's even being resurrected recently with the detainment camps at the southern border and Alexandria Ocasio Cortez going down there. Is they're painting this as some kind of xenophobic, uh, anti? It's like a bigoted, fear of the other type of concern from those that are concerned about the illegal immigration crisis. And I mean, I'm sure that there are people like that. I'm not going to sit there and minimize that. That's not a reality. That there's not people that do have that kind of outlook and are worried more about like preventing further multiculturalism in America. I'm not saying that that doesn't exist, but I don't think that that's the primary reason on the right. I believe it's a national security issue. And that's the thing that most people are looking at, is that this is showing a clear and present vulnerability to our ability to protect our border if people are able to just pour into our border. Now, I feel like I take a pretty moderate approach to it because I do believe that we should have a path to citizenship. I don't believe that there's any reason we should be going through the process of trying to deport law-abiding people who have been in this country and have been productive and law-abiding. um, I do think that we need to upgrade our asylum laws. I think that it's a shame that we have people that want to file for asylum from Nicaragua and El Salvador, and they're not allowed to. They can't file asylum there and get up here safely. They've got to go on this crazy journey through Mexico. But I also see the point that we can't just have, just let immigrants pour in carte blanche with no restriction and just let them come here and just create all these magnets of attraction. I've hated comparing it to this because I don't ever want to compare human beings who are fleeing hell to any sort of I don't want to make light of that kind of a situation, but it kind of reminds me of like when crazy cat ladies set food outside their house and they create like and then they take in every stray that they can. There's a limit to the amount of resources that we have, and also just not knowing who our people are, I think, is a problem. I mean, what modern civilization can survive? I mean, we got things, we got terrorism problems and all sorts of things that go on, and we I mean, this is something that modern governments have known for several decades, that we need to try to have some sort of system where we know our people, we know who are here, we know what they are, and I mean, it's just inconsistent too. I mean, up in New York, you got mandatory vaccinations because there's a small group of people who aren't vaccinating their children. But then these same people that are promoting that are promoting just, you know, people from Central America flooding in undocumented. We don't know their medical history. We don't know nothing like that. It just seems really inconsistent to me, and it's not coming from a position of hate. It's coming more of a position of national security and just, what kind of strain is this going to take on our economic system? And I also don't think that it's addressing the real issue, which is these Central American countries. So, I mean, that's just me kind of laying out in a nutshell where I'm standing on this issue. And I would like to hear yours because I want to try to. I wish that we could find this should be an issue that rational people should be able to find common ground on.
Okay, yeah, and I do. I think we're going to find a lot of common ground because I think that we're actually kind of similar, and it would be terrific to recycle this subject in one of our three sides to every story, so that we can get somebody who's completely on the other side to really stir the pot. I think you bring up interesting points. I think immigration is really among the most difficult of subjects. I've got a couple of ways I could tell stories about it that the United States already does a lot, and here's the thing, you set rules, right? So what we're talking about is illegal immigration. We're not talking about closing the borders and saying nobody comes in, like North Korea or somewhere like that, right? So if you've got a reason to be here and you apply and you go through the process, you can come in. The shores are open. There's rules, right? So those are the rules that aren't being enforced. But how, the level, if you enforce them fully and you don't allow any illegal immigrants in, then what are you going to do when you don't have any apples? No. And I'll tell you my story and why I say that. And is that I lived in Pennsylvania, right, in the area where you are in Mercersburg, in the heart of Pennsylvania, about an hour south of the capital, Harrisburg. It's farm country. Um, and For a little while, I was employed by a medical clinic in that area. And the medical clinic had a grant from the government. The government gave them money. And my job as a translator, because I speak Spanish, was to go to the farms when it was time to pick apples and the other seasonal vegetables and stuff, and talk to the illegal immigrants that were there. And they were hired. They came in dozens, groups of dozens of them. And the farms in central Pennsylvania are equipped with housing for them so that they could stay, 2 months and pick all the fruit and stuff like that. And they feed them, and there's some arrangement for money and stuff like that. But these people are illegal immigrants. My spiel to them, they're not immigrants. This is part of the problem. These people cross the border a couple times a year coming to do this, and they do cross illegally. The problem is that there's so many of them that, there's health issues. They die. What do we do with that? So the clinics became aware of them, and now they have a grant. And I went at the beginning of the season to give them all a card so they would come to the clinic. And there were many people there that were suspicious and would not approach me, even though I could speak their language. They wouldn't give me their information. You'd see a group that stays away. Other groups, other moms have kids there. So yeah, they wanted the clinic and the help and stuff. Other people were sick, so they wanted it. The whole point is these people were illegal, but now they're part of the system, right? So you do have to really go through it with a fine-tooth comb and realize that it's individuals. You know what I mean? It's hard to say for me how you weigh the difference between a Nicaragua and a Syria. You know what I mean? Or a country like Libya or African countries like the type of wars that people are leaving to go to Europe with.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Um, but I can tell you that it's an incredibly bad situation in those countries anyway, even though it's not an out and out war. And
Absolutely, and I think that's why I look at this as more like a symptom rather than a solution. Our illegal immigration problem
it's
is
it's
more of a
it's everything we talk about stinks of trying to police steroids or the drug war or putting the little boy with the finger in the dam. They're
Mhm.
not really You're not really addressing the problem.
And I also just philosophically I look at it as somewhat inconsistent because I've heard this argument. I'm not saying that you're making this argument from a left perspective, but it seems like that's one of the hot button, and it's probably one of the fairer arguments about people that pick our fruits and vegetables, and they're doing it for way cheaper labor than what they'd be able to hire according to our minimum wage laws in America with citizens. But then that argument's typically brought up by the same people who want our minimum wage to be raised. It's like, well, do you support these people coming here and being, um, basically paid next to nothing to do work that other people won't do or will refuse to do only for a much higher price? I mean, I don't. You see what I'm saying? It seems like a little just inconsistent that, oh well, we need to raise the minimum wage for our citizens here, but then we could just let them pour. I see that as almost bigoted. Like, well, why should they be on a different standard? I mean, you're gonna let them come in and work here, but we're saying, oh well, it's okay that these farmers and corporations or whatever want the cheap labor, and we're just going to turn a blind eye to that and let them come in. I, I when it comes to the healthcare thing, that's where this issue gets a little. That's where healthcare and immigration to me go together, and they're two of the hardest issues from a free market capitalist perspective because I don't like even with healthcare, I don't want to see the government monopolize in healthcare in America. I do not want to see that day. But at the same time, I don't want to see a day where it's completely privatized and we got people getting turned away at the ER, at the emergency room. from getting treatment. So there's got to be like a private public partnership. And when it comes to the illegal immigration problem, even if they come over here, they completely break the law, they break in, and I don't care if they're, they just robbed a liquor store and got shot on the way out or whatever, and they committed a crime or whatever, and they're illegal. I still don't want that person being turned away from getting medical treatment. So that becomes a hard um, subject. You're right.
Yep, I'm sorry. I'm just a
No, you're
little
fine. But if
feathery in
if
the
if they're
throat.
here, we do got to treat them in our hospitals. We do got to treat them humanely. I don't like seeing those images of kids sleeping on concrete floors. I think it's been totally exploited by people who want to use their pain and suffering for their own political ends, which really makes me sick. But I think it's definitely something that humane, decent, good people need to be compassionate about and offer a solution for, even if they are not technically our citizens. I discussed just last week on Facebook Live with a buddy of mine about some stuff like, Miguel, we're the American Empire. It was willing to go over into the Middle East and seek to stabilize those nations so that dis instability doesn't spread like wildfire and stuff. But we do very little to try to stabilize these nations just south of us on our own continent that clearly don't have enough law and order to even bring in too much productive investment that would lead to more economic opportunity. And as long as law and order is being corrupted in these areas, we're not going to see that there. So, but we do very little to help them out, and I don't understand. And I would almost rather support, you know, get control of our border and then not just abandon those people to the hell that they're trying to flee from. Just be compassionate and say you can't come in, but then turn around and try to help resolve the conflict that's going on in their own nations. And I know that's going to be a lot of work to do, and it's going to take the right leaders and the right from all these nations and our own. But
And I think to me, you're hitting the nail on the head, but it really becomes a very difficult task to do. Um, you know, from my perspective, and of watching America, and I haven't lived in the United States for about 10 years now, right? But that feeling of having lost respect on the world stage. Now that's not, I believe that started in the 50s, and through the maybe earlier and stuff, but right in the 50s, you start getting involved with overthrowing other governments and getting your hands involved and stuff like that. Now the reason I bring that up is because for many years, you know please fact check me, and if I'm wrong, you can go ahead and correct me, and I'll stand corrected. But you know, aid to Nicaragua, aid to these countries. These countries are on a path where a lot of cocaine comes through. Obviously, right? Cocaine is one of the problems, but it's not the major problem. The major problem is some of the other social work, like basically education, just isn't there in these countries. And what happens is that our ability to help these countries in modern times becomes this way. Hey, Nicaragua, we're going to give you $300 million, right? But instead of saying that $300 million should be injected into your education system and put computers in every classroom, because these are smaller countries, they could actually achieve things. You know, Instead of that, what they do is they say, look, we're going to give you some new guns. We're going to train special police units to go and watch over the drug trade and the other, help with your police and national stuff like that. And these units, say some of them, it only takes a few bad apples to get in there in the training and stuff like that. And it ruins the whole thing. In other words, we're not giving any impressive help at all in this. We're just contributing to what is this military industrial complex that's been, hovering over our country for so long, and that's the cycle of it, is we sell them guns, They use these guys in Mexico. When we sold them guns, we trained their army, and then the drug lords came in and said to the our entire unit that we trained, they said, "Hey, here's your salaries plus 5K a month or whatever it was, you know." And they took them all, choom, weapons, everything we gave them, because the guys were good to go. So I mean, if you don't have the respect and the whole help and the philosophies of the countries are going to change. Those people live day to day in those countries generally, so they're trying to get by. So if somebody says to them, "Here's $5,000, make sure this kilo gets from here to there," or even if it's $100, people will take that risk in those areas because there is no law and order and there's nothing else, and they don't have education. It's the education that's failed them, and that's been systemic for 50 years. So you have just in general, everything's in a poor state. That you've got uh, hospitals that don't work well, people that are turning to the drug trade for fast money and things like that. And then life becomes very cheap and they don't have there's no investigations. People sit there, maybe their son may have been killed and they know exactly that it was the guy down the block who was in the same struggle as your kid who shot him. And yet there's no way to go, Central America is really like that type of Wild Westing. It's not out and out Syria, but Salvador, Nicaragua in certain sections. Nicaragua right now has major protests as well going on against the government where they're trying to do, taxes against the public and things like that. And people are literally coming out onto the streets and, throwing rocks against tanks and stuff like that, And in Nicaragua, they're military. They were always ruled by military, and they were always sold weapons, and they bounce around. Add to all of this the instability of a big country like Venezuela. Where now Venezuela is something that 15, 20 years ago nobody would have expected for there to be millions of people leaving that country. Now that has almost become an Africa type of situation where you've got the neighbors with million setting up a camp for hundreds of thousands of people and stuff like that. And that I'm not sure we were ready for that fast. In Africa they're ready to move. When something happens, they'll put up a camp fast. The Saudis, with their ability and money and stuff like that, can put up a camp for refugees. And put tents with reasonable conditions for people in the hundreds of thousands. And we may get to that point in this country, in this hemisphere, if we're not careful. I think the U.S. could do more. I think we could, with the education,
Yeah.
it just goes a long way, But
Well,
we've been fucking these countries with the military and stuff and not educating anybody for decades. So they don't have a lot of respect here anymore.
yeah, I think that it all starts from the same root though, and I do. I mean, I'm on the side of I can sit and talk all day about all the different things that our CIA, our intelligence, and our federal government has been involved in. Everything from Iran Contra and the funding of the Sandinistas and all this stuff, and obviously overseas in the Middle East and all these different failed. The coup in 1953 in Iran and all this stuff. I know about all this stuff, and because of that, it's given such a bad name to any sort of bigger power coming in. And I don't want to use colonization because that seems to be like more of a permanent connotation that, if you're colonizing something, you're like, that's going to basically be like a little satellite offshoot nation that you control. Not necessarily that, but more of nation building of like, we're involved here for the good. But we don't believe that now. I feel like the world's getting a lot more isolated. Where the public and all these different nations want to see more of an isolationist mentality, and it's definitely been popping up in America basically since the Iraq and Afghanistan wars because we've failed so miserably in them now that we don't believe that there's any sort of foreign intervention within other nations that could be done not only for our own security but also for the security of the world and to help prosper other nations. And then we get this America first, we're the only thing that matters, we should only worry about ourselves. And I see those philosophical arguments and I used to buy into them hardcore, but now I see more of how the world's so interconnected and how things are connected. When I look at these Central American nations, I mean, number one, we've talked already about the drug cartels and the problem with drugs. The streets of America, hands down, are its number one. Are these cartels' hottest markets? So curbing that somehow would be definitely because money flows in, drugs flow in, money flows out. That money is used to corrupt the judicial systems and buy off cops, and as you just mentioned, buy off bad actors within the system. To where if we did try to militarize them, a lot of times, as we've seen overseas in these Middle Eastern nations, we give guns to this, you know, jank Iraqi government, and they fall into the hands of ISIS. Or we try to prop up certain governments. 20 years down the line, those same chemical weapons are over in somewhere that we don't want them because they've been sold around and shipped around. So we end up actually propping up our own enemy inadvertently or advertently, like, in some conspiracy that we know exactly what we're doing. We're militarizing our opposition so that we have justifications. I don't really want to go down that road, but um, I do know that without, as long as there's so much violence and so much of a threat of violence in these areas due to drug militias, that there's going to be very little private investment that's going to come from globalized corporations, and that's going to lead to less tax revenue, to where the federal government can spend more money on social programs that help people out, and education and all this stuff, healthcare. And it's also going to lead just to less personal opportunity to make a better life for yourself. So they're going to end up. So it creates. Ross Perot talked about a giant sucking sound going down to Central America, but really it's bringing them up here, like, because up here there is some law and order, there is private investment, there is the opportunity to get a job and improve on your plight. So and down there, there's just too much instability caused by too much lawlessness that it affects everything. And so I don't know. And the worst part about it is I don't really see that there's any political will on either side to actually doing anything, because just like with abortion and all these different other issues, these hot button issues, they're too easy to use as campaign slogans than to actually fix the problem. And I feel like immigration on both sides right now, this is a hot button issue every election cycle for both sides. You got the right that can come in all Captain America, tough guys, we're going to put America first and push these immigrants out and stuff and seal the border. And then on the other side you got, oh, well, I'm more compassionate and altruistic than you are. And so they got this like this political football back and forth that doesn't really hit home to any of the problems. And I don't see that changing. I'm a little bit pessimistic on that.
No, I think you have every right to be pessimistic on that. I don't think it's going to change. I think the problem with immigration is, again, the laws are the laws, right? But the laws are written at a different time, and things change, and there's no real adaptation or working, or decide to say, we're going to let in this many people this year or that many people, or I don't know exactly what the system is like, but it just seems a little bit disorganized. And then everything else that we're talking about is the illegal guys that get in, so it's nice to be a destination country, and but what I think that nobody can disagree with is that your country can change from a destination country to a country that's no longer desirable to be in very fast. For a country the size of the United States, for that to happen, yeah, sure, it's more drastic, but it happened in a large country like Venezuela recently. People left Bolivia to go to Venezuela. People left Colombia and the FARC insurrections and stuff to go live in Venezuela. And Venezuela was an excellent economy until they ran into problems, or whatever happened, the stability that started, 15, 20 years ago with Chavez, right? So now, that's a situation there that now, again, Brazil, that area of Brazil, those are small towns, small cities in the border of the jungle and stuff like that. They're not prepared for an influx of hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans, and they never in their minds thought that that could have happened. So once again, the United States, first and foremost, we all, lefty, righty, or whatever, we all live in a country that's desirable to be in, and let's keep it that way. And I think that's a starting point that we can all agree on, right? So how do we do that with letting people in, but letting certain people in, keeping certain people out, and stuff like that? To me, the wall is, you know, I don't know. When did the Chinese make the Great Wall? 3,000 years ago? So it's like a 3 millennia old technique. It doesn't work. It's old, And I think, you know, $5 billion or whatever they're talking about. I see kids in cages. I see things like that. It would be just as scary and probably just as capable of stopping immigration, even illegal immigration, if they use that money to put up big complexes where they can house people, even temporarily and stuff like that. But make it so that you don't have to put people in cages, or you don't have to put 8 people in a room that's meant for 3 people, or whatever those situations are. Be prepared. I read somewhere today that in the last year they've separated 900 kids from their parents. Now, what's going on with separated kids and their parents and stuff like that? Now, very well, you know, to me, that's a scary situation because that could be happening. I know for a fact the stories that you hear in Central America that people leave their kids with somebody else if they can't go on and stuff like that. And this is a game that people could have started to play the system because they know it'll save their kid at any rate because they can't identify the parent. And then what do you have to do? You have to take responsibility for them.
Well, I was about to,
Now,
that,
if there's been an increase in that, it's because, yeah, the word is out and people are desperate to get in, right? So now the thing is you can build a wall and then deal with finding bodies of 3 and 4 year olds in the desert, or you can build complexes to really receive these people. Like Australia uses islands to house their immigrants.
hello?
I'm back.
All right, I see you.
I'm back. Okay. The reason we're in this situation too is because it's like, and there's millions of them, right? But it shouldn't be like, well, we found this guy in Indiana and, he's been working and he's got a social security number, but he's illegal. It shouldn't be that way. We should have a process to make sure everybody's tracked and stuff like that. But people get in under the system and then it's like, throw them out. It's like, well, no, maybe there should be some type of log and things like that. How many times are we going to throw people out? So, so
I,
I don't know, but all I know is that it's a hugely complex problem, and the wall is very artificial to me because they'll go over it, under it, through it, and they'll still get through. And at that point, again, you've got people in the desert in some places racing against Mother Nature to get to somewhere where people. And again, the story of the Marines that just got arrested there. People, that's the ugly part. That's the ugly under part of America is that there's always somebody who's there that'll put money above everything else. And now here you had Marines like hustling illegal aliens into the country and stuff like that just to make a buck. That's crazy.
yeah, that. Okay. I do disagree with you on the wall. I don't think just because it's an older philosophy that means it's bad. I think that there's got to be some kind of course, we're not going to end all illegal immigrants, but if we could cut back on the numbers, it could, and especially with like the drug trafficking, sex trafficking, I think that'd be
Here's the thing about the wall, though, and it just I respect, and you have a right to disagree, and I mean you're going to get your wall, so it doesn't matter. But you know, I look more at the Israelis and the Palestinians, and the Israelis don't stop shit from getting in there, and those guys are much more serious. When they say they're going to put up a wall, they put up a wall. When they say they're going to send in the soldiers, they send in soldiers. They don't fuck around. They're much more serious than us. You don't have anybody like an AOC that shows up, throwing in stuff like that, and they can't stop stuff. So that's why I tend to feel the wall won't work. But I respect your
but Gail,
position.
they would have all out civil war if it were not for that wall over there, though. I mean, yeah, they still have some Palestinians tunneling in and shooting bottle rockets over their wall or whatever, but I mean, they would have a straight on culture clash if it wasn't for what's going on over there. And I'm one of those type of people that wants to see a two-state solution on. That's a totally different subject.
No, I
And
know it. I know it is, but I think we can both agree that the Israelis, when they enforce their rules, can be more extreme than the Americans.
far
And
more, but at
and
the
I
same
think I
time,
think
they have no.
that's one of those signs that that again, when you have a policy, if you're receiving people, because we're not in the aggressive mode that they are. When you're receiving people in large, huge, impressive buildings and stuff, I think it might have a different effect than the wall, which immediately puts you in competition and against each other.
The problem that I have with that is I'm all for the humane, helping these people out. Number one, the child separation thing, you touched a little bit on that. Obviously, I don't want to see kids being taken from their parents, but understanding why the border patrol even began to start doing that is because they were overran with kids coming across the border with adults that were not their parents, and they didn't know who these people were. They didn't want to house them with like a bunch of kids with a bunch of other adults, especially when there's so much sex trafficking going on across the border. So they would start separating kids with kids, adults with adults, trying to figure out who these people are. Because keep in mind, they don't. A lot of these people come across, they don't even have any papers. They don't even know who they are. Like they don't know. All they're hearing is spoken. They're speaking their names, and this is who I am. This is who this kid is. The kid's like, is that your mom? Is that your dad? And they're like, no, this is so and so. And as you mentioned, they'll send their kids with people that aren't even them. They're they've gone across a. I mean, dude, it makes you emotional to even think about what these kids and children go through on this journey across here. I mean, it's terrible, and I I'm all for. I mean, if we were going to get to a point where we're building gigantic superstructures, you've already got people in America comparing those to concentration camps and stuff. So
Yeah, no,
you you,
it's a
you build even
definitely.
you build even bigger ones, then all of a sudden ICE is the new Gestapo, and we're basically setting up new Auschwitz in their mind, and so there's really no fix. It's not going to get demonized. Um, the only thing and I don't, it might not work, and it doesn't seem humane. And it's not something that I feel like people, especially I know it's not with me that when I talk about a wall, it's not like just because I want to see you guys get the hell out of here. It's not nothing like that. It's more of I if it can cut down the numbers and it can create a position where these nations have to start fixing up their problem. They got to start at home. They got to start, and I'm all for, as I said at the beginning, America and other established nations to really get in there and help whatever way they can, financially and militarily, whatever there is, whatever ways that we can get in there and help these Central American nations to get on their own feet, and you know, because this has been a problem that's just been neglected for so long now, and but I do see your point. I don't want to see a bunch of images of dead children, um, just south of our borders, and this idea that we could have let them in, we could have taken care of them. I understand the compassion. I mean, I live by an ethic that what's done to the least of these is done to Jesus. So I get it, man. Like it's a morally conflicting position because these are humans. A lot of them children. A lot of them not involved with drug trafficking, not involved with sex trafficking. There's mothers that are coming up, getting their kids across the border who are being raped on a daily and enduring that just to get their kids here. Being trafficked by coyotes and stuff all the way through. So, I from a human aspect, from a human to a human, I see that, and there's compassion, but from a position of politics and law and order and what is going to be the alternative to doing nothing, or just leaving the border just feckless and open. Because the other option would be to eliminate the drug war, which I guess is an option, um, and that could solve a lot of the problem. I think. I don't know if there's gonna. I think that's gonna be a political. I think there'll be far less political will for that than a wall. But I don't know, man. It's we can go round and round about theorizing on this stuff, but one thing I do know for sure is that these it's got to start. I feel like it really needs to start at home. I feel like that's the real root of the problem is what's going on in these nations that's causing this influx of migrants northbound to our shores.
Yeah, no, I think the world is going to be an unstable place. There's more people obviously every day. That's uh, part of the problem is that that's where things change. There comes a boiling point where you cannot take any more people in and continue your way of life. You know what I mean? It's like I don't think Americans who even great Americans that are for immigration, in all forms and stuff like that. I don't know if they'd be all for it if it meant I don't know, some silly things, but like, hey, we can't feed everybody in the country anymore. Everybody's got to do something. Like, yeah, just farm a little food in your backyard, make some carrots. So most people will be like, I ain't farming carrots. That's kind of an un-American way to think, but we do think that way now. It's very, if we're inconvenienced in any way, we would change our tune. You know, I, I I don't mean to knock our way of thinking and stuff like that. Like I said, it comes from being privileged. I'll give you one of the other things I've noticed, and this is again why I go back to the 50s at least. I think that the problem is something long term because when you fucked up things for such a long time, it takes a real effort to clean it up. Um, I don't know if you've heard my example before, but I live in a country, Costa Rica. Like I said, this country is a destination country. People from around Nicaragua and here, they wind up here doing work and stuff like that. But I can tell you, this country doesn't have a postal system. Not one that people like you and me, my grandma on the other side of the country sent me a card for my birthday with $10 in it. Hey, in America, we get our mail. We're used to it. It's like, oh, you didn't get it? I didn't get it. Nobody believes you to say you didn't get your mail. That's the way we are in America, right? I don't understand, why we choose to export McDonald's and Burger King and Wendy's and Taco Bell and Pizza Hut and Domino's and Caesars and Ruby Tuesdays and Hard Rock Cafe. I have every single one of those restaurants here in a country of 3 million people. But we couldn't give them a postal system or show them the way to a postal system. So when we export America, we don't even export what's great about America.
Well, I would
We
argue
never.
that
I think one of the things that's great is, like I said, nobody worries about the postal system. They say, I know it's broken where Amazon broke it and money and this. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about waking up in the day, in the morning, and knowing your mail's coming. They don't have that in these countries. And again, we sell the McDonald's.
I would say that just shows the how much more efficient and productive the private sector is than public sector. I mean, that I guess if there's anything that would define why I consider myself more right wing conservative than left wing is because I think it's just the my difference with the left on our view of government. I see the government as typically incredibly corrupt and incredibly unproductive and inept. And that's a perfect example right there of why. Like, yeah, we can't even export our ideas properly. And when we do go and try to nation build, we typically mess everything up and it becomes corrupt so easily. And it's because there's no competition. It's just complete um just monopolize control and of force. There's no real, and with America's force, we don't. It's there's nobody there to really challenge us anymore. I think that's changing on the world stage, and I'm not so sure that that's a good thing. But
Well, I mean, even right now, we may be, and now it's a little bit of a different subject, but why not? Right now, we may be in fights or picking on fights that we cannot win. And for example, if we have to take on Iran, we could probably handle Iran. Now, what happens, unfortunately, there is that Iran becomes us probably a very feisty and very happy Israel to finally be very ready to go against Iran and not alone, and probably Saudi Arabia and some of those other countries. Now, once Iran is faced with those three, they're going to ask for help. And they're going to ask Russia and China for help. And it becomes not worth it, although at that point we're talking about getting our oil. So that fight, if Iran asks for help and those countries decide to give them the help, then you're in a major situation where the outcome is definitely not written in stone.
And that's why we need rational diplomatic actors on the world stage on all these different.
And I'm sorry to interrupt because I know, and I'll let you go too. But one of the reasons to tie it back to our original theme, though, that you mentioned that very few people, the United States, are already being challenged. Like, for example, I'll give you a perfect example right here in Venezuela. The bottom line is that government is good to go. Everybody, all the regional governments, everybody around them has stated we follow the provisional government. Now, the provisional government, everybody says, hey, they made up a second government and named another guy president. That's not actually what happened. The Venezuelans, they have a constitution, and those other elected bodies like Guaido and that faction there went through all the constitutional steps to replace the president and to be where they are now. So they are operating by the book of the law and should be recognized by every country on the planet, except for Russia and China decided not to. And they didn't do that precisely. Maybe there are some ties to Venezuela, especially also through Cuba and stuff like that, that gives them some ties and some influence there. But they did that mainly because it's in our backyard and they can.
And because they look at it as U.S.
weakness.
influence.
And 25 years ago, we would not have, they couldn't have done that 25 years ago. So those are all signs where, if the United States, here's the problem is we're down a path, right? So the U.S. could close up and say, look, we're going to spend the next 25 years worrying about ourselves. Fix our roads, fix our bridges, get it off of this coal dependency. Everybody's got a solar panel and a windmill, and everybody has an electric car, and we're blasted into the 22nd century, way ahead of Norway and Sweden and all these other countries. I mean, if we good old American ingenuity, if you actually did that and just concentrated on ourselves, we'd be in great shape. We might see Mars, et cetera, et cetera. But, right now we have a lot of dependent people. If you pull out of that, like they have in Nicaragua and El Salvador, part of the reason that, there's more people heading up there is because the situation is worsening. And part of that is because the money that was sent there isn't being used properly. And also the money that was sent there stopped being sent. So you had people in power corruptly, but receiving money and backing and weapons. And all of a sudden that gets yanked, and now you have a free-for-all, and that's where guns and weapons fall into the wrong hands and things like that. So the things have actually worsened when the U.S. pulls out. So you have to take that into account because, did you ever see the movie World War Z?
No, but I completely agree with what you...
Just real fast, there's a scene in World War Z where the zombies are just piling on top of each other and escalating a wall over and going over the wall. That may be what you start to see at your wall in the United States if things get much worse here. You know,
Well,
similar like we don't have the benefit of the Mediterranean Sea like Europe does, and Europe still has hundreds of thousands of immigrants that they don't know what to do with. So yeah, it's going to get worse if and that's why I think you get the status quo, because if you do go all the way and just act selfishly, now you're contrary to where you've been, our whole lives as a country. We've always been more of an outreaching kind of thing. But, there's a call for, I can understand being selfish, but it doesn't come without a price. It'll fix some things internally, maybe, but you will turn around and find the world a much messier place.
I completely agree with what you just were saying about pulling out because, dude, that's not who I was. 6 years ago, I was one of the most, I was a Ron Paul libertarian, very anti-interventionist, very radically just as far right when it comes to political and conservative like fiscally. I was very much a borderline anarcho-capitalist that I wanted to see the dissolution of government and the public sector as much as I could, and I wanted to see foreign entanglements drawn back to 1776 days where we are not involved overseas. But what's really changed my mind is just understanding the world a little more. I mean, when we look at stuff like what happened in Iraq, we all realize that the toppling of Saddam was probably one of the biggest strategic blunders that could have happened at that time with what our motives for fighting terrorism were over there. We should have probably tried to build somewhat of a structured alliance with him, even if we weren't, seeing eye to eye, and he could have probably helped stable. He had his nation pretty stable from random militias coming in and filling a vacuum. Well, we
Yeah.
go in there, we topple the country, and then right before the 2012 Obama Romney election, the year before, Obama pulls them all out, campaigns on ending the Iraq War, and then literally overnight, ISIS fills the void. There's a massive Yazidi genocide going on, and we end up having to go back in, and because you can't just leave vacuums. And as you just were talking about with these nations, even these nations in Central America that we pulled out and left the void there, they don't turn out any better. And so I do see that argument that if we quit letting um, immigrants in, we're gonna start having it's just gonna get even worse. And as you just mentioned, like we're gonna have zombies crawling over the wall. I get that. That's why I don't believe that the only thing we can do is just okay, we're secure. That's gonna cut back 85% of the amount of what we dealt with. Now happy days are here in America again. We're saying Merry Christmas and singing all the classic rock songs and just eating apple pie. We're Americana over here now. Everything's good because we got them poor Central American immigrants out of here. I mean, I don't believe. I don't think that. I think we do need to be even more involved once we get control of our borders. And I think that we definitely need some kind of world coalition to help stabilize these nations and make them more stable and uh, really get some law and order down there so that we can see these nations thrive. Because I want to see those nations thrive. I mean, I want to see these nations be strong allies with the United States and for our borders to be, um, for our continent, for us to
But
be as one and be in harmony.
in history, in the 20th century, when the Americans put their best foot forward, people followed them.
Mm-hmm.
But we haven't been doing that, right? So that's where you get people that doubt, people that are willing to be contrarian to, well, even like I said, in Venezuela, the guy is entrenched and he still thinks the U.S. is doing all of this stuff. They want, they like him out of there. They could have him out of there in minutes if they wanted, and they're not doing that. They're trying to let a process draw out. So they're clearly not as involved as the Venezuelans like to make it out to be. They like to play it like it's the bad guy and use the American. But all that's possible because we're just not as impressive anymore on the world scene, and that's what worries me. You know what I mean? You could say follow us, but if people don't follow, our way of life and stuff, and people are offering a different way of life, the Chinese, you know, the problem with that is, how heavy-handed are they going to become? They become more and more heavy-handed every time, and it's hard to say that they're not aggressive. To me, it's hard to say that they don't have a long-term thinking of us versus them, you know, played out over a long history. Maybe not on a day-to-day basis, but they're playing a competition game, and if you don't respond in the like, you do get left behind. You know, so the U.S. by virtue of being where they are, they're assaulted from all sorts of different sides. Immigration is just one of them. But like I said, immigration. If you look at the example of Italy in Europe, where Italy is very close to Africa in geography, and the boats are able to get there. Italy is the worst of problems there, and they're literally fighting in the parliament at the European Union, where and it's classic. This is the kind of stuff where it's like, oh, the Dutch are so it's an advanced country, and Holland's pretty advanced in terms of also on the world scene. Um, but it's Dutch boats, owned boats that pick up the immigrants because Dutch people are for immigrant, they want to help. Italy said, you know what? Take him to Holland. We're done here. No more can come in, and they do have millions of them. And then once you've got a situation where there's just a mass quantity of people, you think in Italy they can't find an example of a black African that raped an Italian woman? And then they blow that up in the news and stuff like that. It has to have happened because of the sheer quantity, not because all Africans are rapists. But we've had tragedies in the United States, and I can tell you, most people trying to go to the United States envision a better life for them, and it really, to me, talking to them, and I've been in immigration to get my papers to stay here, going through the process and stuff like that. But there are few people like me, and many of those types of people trying to find things here, and they're all trying to look for a better life. It almost seems naive, it almost seems childish, and like they're still, you know, following like a dream. You would hope that there's more direction and more, substance to the life that's given through education, through things like that in their country. But if their hope is now I'm going to walk, try to hit the desert, and in the desert, I know I got a 2-day walk to get to a country where what? My I know my aunt got there and she lives in, Knoxville. So I'm trying to get to Knoxville or whatever it is, It's just to want to leave and go through all that is a bad situation, And again, they're going to keep doing it as long as but you can't take everybody. Everybody's not worth taking. That's the truth, obviously.
Yeah, I mean that's where the whole national security issue comes in because it's I've raised this question before in a rant that I did on this subject because I was just frustrated because taking to the logical conclusion, let's just say every impoverished person around the world were able to somehow make it to our borders and get in. I mean, should we be responsible to take them all in? I mean, we're talking all 2 billion people that are living on less than $1 a day around the world. I mean, we're forgetting that over in Africa, I mean, we're talking poverty levels that we can't even imagine. Just literally, they don't even have drinking water half the time. Clean drinking water. We're talking public outhouses. Um, and we have a finite amount of resources, including land. Land. That's where the whole nationalities and borders even began. Is that we realize that there's not just this infinite amount of space, that we want dominion over our territory, and we've got to start protecting this territory because humankind has forever been vicious with each other. They'll come in, they'll raid you, they'll take you over. Back in the day, tribes would fight with each other. It was so hard in the evolutionary process to even get a nation established because it took a lot of social cooperation, a lot of banding together, a lot of strategy, to where they even began to understand, oh, wait a minute, we need to start creating defense. We need to start banding together for not for like to defend our territory. And then territory, once they got stronger, they began to spread and grow and get bigger. And now over just thousands and thousands of years of this, we've got the borders carved up the way they are, with certain established states that have dominion over these properties, and they got to guard that. And so we understand that resources are finite, that the ability to take care of people, like if there was this a system right now that could cure poverty worldwide, that could be a distributive process that could just fix everything, and everybody's all of a sudden productive, there that we've all got health care, we're all well educated, we're all got shelter over our heads, we've all got our daily essentials, who would be unsupportive of that? It's how do we get to there when we have to produce all these goods? We've got to manufacture them in some way. We've got to protect people long enough to even be able to produce it, because that's like the biggest problem Africa and Central America and in the Middle East have, is you can't even get anything going without, I mean, the kind of law and order that we have in America is really the exception to the rule in all these, especially historically, because governments don't just form easily. They're just not self-evident. Like a lot of times, like you go to Somalia, good luck trying to create a state there right now, because there's going to be so many different warring tribes that are going to come in and tear the place down before they can even really get a strong foothold. They're not going to just acquiesce to the authority structure that gets put in place. So we obviously have a limitation to how many people we can bring in, and on top of that, if people could just pour in theoretically, unlimited and unchecked, I don't know anybody that would say that doesn't show a clear vulnerability about us being able to control our borders. So there's definitely a limit. It's definitely a vulnerability if they can get in here unchecked. So now what do you do about it? What's the root of the problem? Why do we have so many people coming in? We've got a great nation. To the south of us, we got some really messed up nations. These people are not our problem. These people are not the angst that we should have against. That does frustrate me on the right, is the people that get mad at these people. These are the casualties of the war. You know, these are the casualties of the broken system. These people that are coming in, they're like getting tossed back and forth right now, like between two broken systems: our broken immigration system and the broken just government and failed states that are south of us. And I don't feel like without some sort of international cooperation among these states and us, as well as maybe the rest of the world, to really buckle down and fix this problem in this region, that you're right. I don't think anything's going to solve it. And just constructing a wall and thinking that solves the problem, that's selfish and ugly. And I can see why people would think like, oh, if you think that that's the only thing we're going to do, that's a bigoted, ugly thing to think, because you're basically giving the finger to a bunch of poor, impoverished, desperate people. But if we're going to construct a wall, tighten up border security, enact e-verify or whatever, plus provide a significant amount of aid and um, some sort of security apparatus down south of us to stabilize that region, I think that's. I mean, it's a long-term goal, and it's probably a very expensive one. But I think that's the only way to really solve this. So, I don't know. It's, but as we said, good luck with the political environment in the United States.
Yeah, you said a lot there, and it brings to mind a lot, because I do think that you hit one of the core problems worldwide on immigration on the head, and it has to do with borders and things like that. And basically, the borders that we deal with on a worldwide basis right now are Anglo-Saxon borders. The African borders are made by the British and the Belgians and et cetera, and so too were the Palestinian borders and the Saudi Arabian borders and all those, the border with Iraq and Syria, where there are tribes that, wander between both countries and things like that. And I think you have that, in the United States. This may be a generalization, but, it's also a little bit of, there's truth behind it. But in North America, in what is the United States, we basically killed all the Indians. We basically just killed them. And in Central and South America, the Europeans weren't quite as efficient. So now you've still got, now it's many, a couple hundred years down the line and stuff like that, but you still got a group, of the a large portion of the population that comes from a much simpler culture of, whatever that culture was. They feed themselves and they farmed and they had gold and they worshipped, gods or whatever, whatever the deal is. I don't even know if we know enough about those cultures or anything like that. But I do know that, until the white man showed up, they pretty much they had their wars and things like that and stuff like that. But, especially in North America, the Indians, they had pretty much achieved living, more or less in harmony and keeping their space and territory, not going in others. And so there weren't a lot of them, and they weren't dealing with overcrowding. Who knows what they'd look like now? But the point is again, with the Indians, we killed them all, so we don't have to deal with it. They didn't kill every African. They didn't kill every Arab. So now, but they gave them borders without having any understanding at all about them. You know, they made things up when they didn't. To seem smart when they didn't know. If you look at, like, for example, the case of Rwanda, with the Hutus and the Tutsis, that's a complete invention. And people killing themselves over calling you one or the other, to the tune of, hundreds of thousands. That was a poorly made border there. You know what I mean? The borders in Palestine, the borders in the Arab countries and stuff show no understanding of the tribes and stuff like that. And we seem to think like it's like we're taking the tribes out of, you know the Stone Age or whatever it was. But, I don't know if they lived in harmony and they weren't. It seems to be us that kills people. Not the other way around. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I don't know how you solve problems that are that old. And that's the problem. Even in Central and South America, where the problem isn't that aggravated, and again, those cultures are gone. There's not, the Incas aren't there. In some, villages and stuff like that, they're gone. So, but again, what you have there is you have just a lack of understanding, a lack of education. The people there still live, day to day, similar to the way they did, and in large parts of some of these areas and stuff. You'd be surprised how, close to the Stone Age people live, especially in the forests of the Amazon and stuff like that. It's some of those towns are very backwards.
Well, I think the story of the Europeans coming to America really demonstrates where we've been. What the big like this is nothing new. These are not new issues that the world has had to deal with. This is stuff that's been going on for thousands of years. And I think that even just looking at what just 500 years ago, when Europeans started migrating onto this land, number one, when it comes to the Indians, all the estimates is that maybe on the entire continent, 10 to 15 million, maybe. And they weren't just like one nation. They were broken up into several different tribes. So obviously, I don't think anybody, and I'm not saying you're saying this, I don't think anybody would say that, oh, well, we should have all just stayed over there and none of the rest of the world could not share in this land at all. Obviously not. But at the same time, they had dominion here. So we come, and then immediately there's a culture clash. Well, we're getting a little bit better with that as a human race because we're so interconnected now. we know each other a little bit better than when we see as a white European who's grown up again around nothing but white Europeans sees a um, African from Ethiopia, we don't look at them as less than human because they look different than us now. Or we see a brown um, Cherokee Indian with feathers on his head, we don't look at him as some kind of savage, crazy person now. Like we've got a little bit more. We understand a little bit more scientifically and just interpersonally what it means to be human now. And I think that's a good thing that's going to help our immigration and our interconnected ability with these things. But the problem is you still with the story of the Europeans and the Indians coming in. Like I've seen memes on Facebook that use that to talk about like, oh well, we've got conservative white America against immigration now, when we were immigrants that came in and stole land. I I agree. I completely agree. But what you're saying is, well, not what you're saying, Miguel, but what that meme is saying is, so let me get this straight. You're saying that a culture came in and instead of assimilating, they weren't able to protect their borders. They weren't able to stop them from coming in. They didn't just come in small numbers. They came in a bunch of numbers. And instead of assimilating to the culture here, they overthrew it and established their own culture. I don't believe that that's what's going on with our southern border crisis. Like, I don't believe this is like some invasion or anything. But obviously, there was a problem with the natives and their ability to push back on their borders. And it was a little bit different today. It's more of like, okay, how many can we let in humanely? But we are having a problem where we don't even know who these people are. And you know, do you think that this could spawn into more of like, I mean, do you not think that that's something that we should fear about potential, you know,
Yeah,
if
no,
there,
I agree with you. Look, if you're here illegally, and sometimes here's my issue, and the reason I keep going back to history and keep talking about how entrenched the problem is. Let's say all the laws are passed, and tomorrow Trump comes on TV and says, "Look, everybody who's illegal in every town in America, no matter where you are, go to a local post office. There are now forms there for you to fill out, and that will be your application to begin the process of becoming a citizen here. You can tell us how long you've been here. You can tell us where you work. So you could give us the social security number that you've been using, because many of them, went through the process of finding somebody who's deceased, for the 70s and using their social and stuff like that. We all know the little games and stuff. So here you come clean, and you tell people, look, fill this out, and we'll start the process. And here we go, and yeah, fingerprints, so that we know, this guy isn't the guy that's been killing people, and that sort of stuff. So yeah, that would be a process that I think that we should all be able to agree on, right?
absolutely, absolutely. I
Sure,
don't.
but
It's stupid not to.
except for that, by virtue of the way we built the system and all this history I'm talking about, just like me when I went to the farm and I had a group of guys that were immigrants not accept a card from the clinic and not want medical care, so that we wouldn't register them and we wouldn't have them on our books. They just didn't give a shit. And the reason for that is trust. They don't trust us. And until you're in a position where you are the leader that people look to, but we're no longer that. So people, once there's skepticism, they don't trust it. What do you want my name for? What do you want? You're going to separate me from my kid? No, no, no. It all gets confused. So you can put the system in there, but there's still a lot to fix. Even if what I just said was just that's what they did. Go to the post office, register, and in 2 or 3 months, a caseworker will call you, and just keep going about your lives like you do now. But we got them registered. I predict they would get half of them. The other half would stay. I don't trust the system. I don't know, and that's what's bad. We shouldn't be in a situation where people doubt our words, but that's what happens. And there's so much fighting back and forth. We don't look good, and again, just not impressive. Why follow somebody who's not impressive? All they want to do is get here and just cut your lawn for $20, and they got 10 they can send back to Nicaragua. If it stays that simple for them for now, they're fine with that. Why go through some paperwork and then you maybe sit in a detention center, not get employed, not be able to send money back, and everything gets confused. And then you make it, you have a job, you get a social security number, you've paid all the illegal people, all the graft that you have, and then they take your name on the list, and for some reason they bop you back. We found your fingerprint at a bar fight. Bar fighting, where do you draw the line? I don't want people coming up here to fight in bars, but is that a good enough reason to send somebody back to a place where they could be looking? So that's unless we do something to build up our trust worldwide, I think we're going to be putting out fires like this all the time. Whether it be one or another, we're there. After the crisis has happened.
Yeah, I definitely think we do need to have some kind of system where we get everybody out of the shadows and document them and sort things out from there before we can go any further. I mean, I know that a lot of these politicians on both left and right have looked at it the opposite way, that we need to close the border first and then deal with the ones that are here. I disagree. I think we need to deal with the ones that are here, get that situated like simultaneously as we're doing something to shut the border down and get everything taken care of, and then start looking outward. Okay, well, how are we going to humanely help these people that want to get in? I think we should take in more legal immigrants. I think we should start fast tracking it more. But as I said, dude, I'm very pessimistic about government and the way the political theater is today, because these are just such hot button issues that both these parties don't care if they're exploiting people. They don't care if I firmly believe that there are Democrat politicians that genuinely don't care. In fact, kind of thrive on racial issues and on immigrants in border camps and not very good uh, precarious situations, because it gives them political clout to go down there and get their name out, and they're the altruistic, compassionate, freedom fighter loving people, and there's people that will just swallow this up because some politician goes down there. This stuff happens on the right too. I think there's politicians on the right that would really not really like it if all of a sudden the whole country turned pro-life and we just banned abortion, because what would they really go around campaigning about at that point? Like, that's like their hot button issue to appeal to their base. And if they don't have that, then what do they have? You know what I mean? Like, it's like if people get what they want, then there's no more of this political theater. And I feel like there's no way that common sense people in our government have been so that they're so divided, just ideologically. I mean, there's to the point where they cannot come up with rational solutions across the. There's no way that it's got to be top down controlled to make sure that it doesn't go there. And I think it's been like that for a long time. I feel like television and social media has only made it worse. And I don't feel like there's people that from different perspectives can sit down in the government and just strike a deal, and both sides lose a little bit, both sides win a little bit. I just don't see it. Like, I don't see it being that way. I feel like it's gonna continue to be a divisive back and forth, um, and I just, like I said, it's a very pessimistic view, but I don't see this really changing much.
Yeah, no, I mean, unfortunately, the way the politics are now, I do firmly believe that we don't even see what's going on. That you're seeing a little bit of a dog and pony show and things like that. You mentioned it. I didn't even think of it because I'm removed and I hadn't noticed it the way you noticed it. But you mentioned that you feel like they're grooming Ivanka for a run in the future. And I mentioned to you that I clearly think the Clintons, or at least Hillary, was grooming Chelsea. Um, is there little doubt that she might not?
Michelle
But,
Obama also.
yeah, that's the one I was going to mention. But if Michelle Obama were to present herself in a few years, you know, and we get Barack as the first man, you know. Would that surprise you? You know, the problem here is to me is just this conversation, and you know, you can bring the Bushes into it, is completely contrary to what our political system was meant to be. There, it was supposed to be against the kings and the dynasties, but through money, you know, we've turned it into, you know, just your average, you know, Neil deGrasse Tyson couldn't run for president. He probably doesn't have enough money to do it. You know, you'd have to really, you know, but it starts with these guys that are either in the political engine or guys that have a ton of money, you know, whether it be ketchup money or Ross Perot money or whatever, or Donald Trump money. You can't just run for president. And it used to not be that way. You used to be able to. You used to have a chance if you were, you know, like I said, Neil deGrasse Tyson is a scientist and he's a genius at many other things. He's so logical that perhaps he would make a great leader. You know what I mean? But we used to think that way. Now everybody that we elect is a lawyer, and that to me is just, you know, a corruption of the original intent of the system. I'm a gun owner. You come into my house, I will blow your head off. But in no way, shape, or form do I think I'm against this government. Let me get my gun out and let's march on Washington. You know, it's like that's no longer the part of the Constitution that works. So you know, whatever, you know, that's not that relevant an issue. But what I mentioned it because, you know, all these ideologies and things like that. How do they work in practice? You know, immigration is one of the big ones. What are you going to do? You know, it's okay. Send every Somalian to St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm cool with that. You know, go to St. Paul. I've been there. Don't plan on going again. Don't know many people up there. Probably will never go again. I could care less if they send 50,000 Somalians up there. But, you know, if we think about the repercussions and things like that, you know, maybe it's better to spread them out. Maybe it's better, you know, to give, you know, to not force that upon a city and stuff like that. Why are we forcing that? Because the population there happens to maybe lean a little more left and maybe they voted a certain way. But it's not, you know, there's still 48% of the people there that are like, what the hell are we going to do with all these Somalians? You know, it's not a great way. What do they call them? Like relief cities or you know, where they send a lot of the
Oh,
refugees.
the sanctuary cities. Yeah.
Sanctuary cities. That's the word that was escaping. You know, it just none of those things are like a solution. Again, what that does is create conflict. You're a sanctuary city. I'm not. I don't want to be in a sanctuary city.
But,
I don't want to be. You know, Austin's not going to be a sanctuary city. You know, why start that debate? Why, you know,
and not only that,
you started the fight.
not only that, you still do have culture wars. I mean, we have gone so far down the politically correct rabbit hole now that you can have in Europe right now with their immigration issues, where you literally have people pouring in that they have absolutely no. They have it worse than what we do, hands down, because they're dealing with war torn refugees from a very radical part of the world, and they're taking. I mean, they're bearing the consequences. They're having massive amounts of uh, terror terror acts and all sorts of stuff going all across their continent, and yet it's still like just buying into this politically, like, well, you don't want to be xenophobic, you don't want to be racist. It's like, I'm not trying to be. I'm just looking at what reality is. I'm not saying the vast majority of them are like this, but it's still something we need to look at. Just 10% is too much. You
You
know,
know, far be it for me to give Trump credit for anything he said, but he said something about immigration when he was in Europe that a lot of people jumped on when he said it, you know, but if he's, we're sort of heading down a path, right? And he may be, if he's not right now, he may be right in the future. And then that really becomes the type of question. And, you know, maybe people do have to fight over it. And what I'm talking about is, he said to France that because they were allowing so much immigration. They had allowed so many Africans and so many Arabs and stuff like that, that they had really changed the culture of France. That they had really losing what it is to be French is what he said, you know. And I mean, I think they deal with about 10 or 12% of the population at this point, you know. So they, you know, they're a major factor in France. It's, you know, a huge country, right? Multiply that by two, multiply that by three. Then what is the effect on your culture? You know what I mean? And at that point, you know,
You lose it.
as an American, it's hard for me to not be proud of some shit. You know what I mean? You know, and yeah, you know, you could say, you know, whatever. Like for example, you know, I mentioned our postal system. Part of that was the trains and stuff like that. And yes, we can all get in. I could feel bad about the way the trains were built because I'm sure that immigrants were abused in laying out the tracks, and that, you know, people probably died horrible deaths. But you know, and I don't want to say what's done is done and stuff like that, but yeah, we can reckon with that. We can make amends in some way and stuff like that. But I don't think it diminishes everything that, you know, that we've accomplished as Americans. You know, sending a man to the moon and things like that. There's, you know, a postal system that works. Tons of reasons why our country's a destination. Why we are proud of it, whether we're white or black or whatever. I don't know if I agree with, like, well, you know, I don't know. I'm never. What I don't understand. I guess this is where there's a difference in people, and we agree to respect it. But it's like I don't understand how I could sit in a classroom and say I don't want my kid to do the Pledge of Allegiance. It's like we live here. We all live here. It's, you know, kind of like a good thing. Just, you know, oh no, it's brainwashed. This that. Maybe you're reading too much into it. You know, are you an American? You live here. You are. So I don't know where that strand comes from. We have to tolerate it and stuff like that. But that's the part that's kind of weird. It's like, what makes you so not proud to be an American that you would say something like, well, maybe it's the slavery, maybe it's the rape, maybe there's a justification to it. Some of those things are good reason and stuff like that. That's why I think, you know, we can reckon with some of the things that we've done, but erasing, you know, the great things that that the achievements and things, that's what people try to do too. You know, it all becomes a fight. It's a good, bad, nothing's black and white. So it's a very confusing subject. I'm sorry to ramble.
No, it's I hear you, man. I hear you, and um, yeah, the whole I get a little. Even myself, I get a little bit nervous about the whole, you know, national culture and heritage thing because it's just so frowned upon today. But like you just were talking about with the French, but you know, I've always stuck to that, to a quote that I heard once that said, "Immigration without assimilation is invasion." Because you're importing a new culture. Like if you're coming to a different culture, you know you should be expect. I don't think that it's a bigoted thing to say we have a identity, we have a culture, and that does it is bigoted if it's ethnocentric. If you know, like, oh well, we're white nationalists. No, I believe that as Americans we can take in any race that there is, but we still have certain historical traditions. We have holidays that we recognize. We have certain moments in our history that we commemorate. That we look at. You know, even on D-Day, even on Memorial Day, 4th of July, like Thanksgiving, all this different stuff. Like we're not going to revise every bit of our history just to curse ourselves. And that's where we see today, like, yeah, the white man did a lot of problems, but show me a show me a society somewhere where they were just all kumbaya, not fighting with each other in world history. You're not going to find it. The one thing that the Europeans had that a lot of other nations didn't have is they got so prosperous, so dominant that they colonized a lot of the world. And I'm not justifying that.
Look, the white man can be accused. What it is we're terrible front runners.
Well, I don't even want to look like it's like a superiority thing. I don't even look at it like that because there
Well,
was a
no,
lot.
I think though that in terms of, you know, we conquered the seas, we traveled to their lands. You know, it wasn't the other way around. There is a certain sense that we got to a certain period, you know, scientifically advanced further. The problem with it is a lot of that could be luck, circumstance, you know, a particular genius here or there. It's like, you know, we don't all deserve credit for being superior because we got a little bit ahead in the race for a little bit. If we're competing, I think the Chinese look at it that way too. That they, you know, the advancements of the Chinese, the Indians, you know. So we were, you know, when the British colonized India, you could say they colonized it. They were a little bit ahead in, you know, a timetable or a race, a competition. I don't know. You know, they were benefiting and using the other race. So there is that edge there that was there. I just don't think it means that white people are smarter. I think that
No,
and I think that that's probably the innate advantage is that, especially through civilization or the innate thought among some of the problematic type of philosophies, I think is that the thought of like, well, we civilized Africa, we're going to, they're savages, the Indians are savages, they don't know what to do. Maybe they had simpler lives or whatever, but that implied superiority, I think, was the core mistake. And again, we're ahead, so we're exploiting rather than benefiting, and trying to show them, look, we can build houses that are more stable, we can do stuff like that, and interchange, we crush and dominate. So, we've come out of that tendency, as you said. Now there's vigilance, the world knows and stuff, and we're trying to change, but it's a cultural thing. It wasn't hard. When you've got the advantage, people press it.
yeah, and I'm not gonna curse a history that has to, like, we can't even on when it comes to talking about Columbus, which I know that he wasn't like just one of a kind of his generation, but celebrating being able to circumnavigate the world and celebrating like the great artist of Western history and the great musical people like Bach and Mozart and Da Vinci and Van Gogh and all this stuff,
Getting to the moon,
and yeah, these political systems that formed in Rome and the intellects of the Greeks and stuff. All these are part of our heritage and our history that I'm not ashamed of to say, oh well, I'm a white European descent. Like, well, they did a lot of great things, but at the same time, I know that a lot of Africa's history got completely subverted and stolen from them, and I know that I mean, every culture around the world has amazing things that they've contributed to the human race. But for a culture for us to start saying that we've got to be so um, internationalized and globalized that we've got to basically tear down our nationalistic, heritage and pride, even if it's not ethnocentric, even if it's not. I mean, if it's something that's based purely on xenophobia and bigotry, yeah, that's a problem. But if we're welcoming, if we're diverse, if we're allowing a free exchange of ideas and ideologies and thoughts, but we still want this overarching, shared memories of the past, basically, you know, I think that's a great thing. I think that's what makes. I mean, that's what makes a family is having shared memories of the past, having some sort of connection with each other that binds you even in your diversity. So yeah, it's immigration, countries, nationalities. All this is such a hot topic that can be talked about for days, Miguel, because it ties in a lot of different things.
Yep, for sure. It's been a good conversation. Like I figured at the beginning, we've solved nothing, but it definitely was fun, and definitely, you get the ideas flowing. And I think that it all starts with that. It all starts with open dialogue. People and an openness to change. That's the thing is people can't get entrenched in thinking that they're so absolutely right that it's the other person that has to change. Everybody can change a little bit. So with that, let's go ahead and cut it short. And thanks for joining us here. If you can like and subscribe, it would be great. It's been Outside the Cage, talking immigration, the border crisis, and beyond with Devin Miller and Miguel Dorati.